This is Josh Friedman in Kharkiv, Ukraine, where today I will be discussing some of the ethnic issues that Ukraine is confronting as a society, which include but are not limited to Ukraine's relations with Russia and issues between Ukrainians and Russians. Kharkiv, or as it's known in Russian, Kharkov, is located just about 25 miles away from the Russian border. This is northeastern Ukraine, and it really does not have a European feel. This is Freedom Square, where I'm standing right now, which basically is a big parking lot. And the buildings, like the city, look very Russian. The city, I would say, feels, looks, and sounds very Russian. This is a Russophone city. Everyone's walking around speaking in Russian, as is the case in most of eastern and southern Ukraine. And the language issue is very prominent in Ukrainian politics right now, because a controversial bill was just signed into law by President Petro Poroshenko. That bill, now law, will require that all children in school in Ukraine, from secondary school on, or about 5th grade on, study and take their classes with Ukrainian as the main language. There are a lot of ethnic minorities in Ukraine. Ukraine has sizable Hungarian, Romanian, Polish, Bulgarian, and other minorities, on top of the many Ukrainians who speak Russian as their native and primary language. And this bill, now law, has really triggered a couple of these countries that have sizable minorities here in Ukraine. Romania reacted with Romanian President Klaus Iohannis canceling an upcoming trip to Ukraine in response to this bill that has now become law. And just yesterday, Hungary issued a statement saying that it is going to block all new European Union integration efforts with Ukraine, meaning they're going to try to put a halt or maybe even veto to new ways to bring Ukraine closer to the European Union. Russia, of course, is opposed to this law as well, and now is an opportunity to discuss how Russia and Russian is very much on people's minds here, and what has played out here in recent years. The building you see behind me is the regional state administration building here in Kharkiv, in the Kharkiv Oblast. Back in 2014, when chaos was breaking out in Ukraine, I believe it was in March, someone replaced that Ukrainian flag you see on top of the state administration building with a Russian flag, and then pro-Russian demonstrators or separatists, or maybe even Russians, we don't know who they were, occupied this building, and it took Ukrainian special forces to drive them out of it and restore Ukrainian control over the building. Well, the pro-Russians were trying to set up a Kharkiv or Kharkov People's Republic, a la what's happened in Donbass, where there are these self-proclaimed Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. That triggered a major reaction from the people here in Kharkiv, or Kharkiv as it's said in Ukrainian, there were large counter-protests, pro-Ukrainian protests, and that basically warded off an attempt to spread the war in Donbass and the occupation of Donbass by the pro-Russian separatists to here. That did not happen, and later in 2015, I believe it was in September, later in 2014, I believe it was September, down here where you see these trees, I'm sorry I can't give you a close-up, but I can crop in a photo. These trees and this green fence, there stood what might have been the largest Lenin statue in Ukraine, and that was toppled back in 2014, a few years ago, and that basically signified Ukrainian control over Kharkiv. However, right about that time, a little later possibly, in late 2014 and late 2015, there were a series of mysterious bombings in the city, several of which targeted Ukrainian military or military support agencies, businesses, even a bar that I guess supports the Ukrainian military. And there never really was clarity as to who caused those bombings and what was going on. Ukraine blames Russia for carrying out those bombings. And then in February of 2015, there was another bombing, and this one was deadly. It killed 4 people, and the faces of the victims can be seen over at this setup here, where there's a pro-Ukrainian tent and setup of photos right here outside the state administration building. There's been some occasional flare-ups since then, but the majority of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict that spread from Donbass to here happened in 2014 and early 2015. And while Kharkiv remains a Ukrainian city under Ukrainian control, it really raises this issue of what is Ukraine going to look like in the future in terms of language, ethnicity, demographics. The city, like I said, is located very close to Russia geographically, and although it appears to be more pro-Ukrainian than pro-Russian, it is very close to Russia culturally, obviously, as people are walking around speaking Russian. The city does not have a European feel at all. It feels like a totally different country than, say, Lviv, something I alluded to in a vlog that I shot in Lviv a week or two ago. So Ukraine right now, on top of all of its economic problems and the ongoing war in Donbass, and on top of the corruption and the failed reforms in the country, is struggling with the issues of identity and ethnicity. What's it going to do about all these ethnic Hungarians, ethnic Romanians, ethnic Bulgarians, ethnic Poles who live in the country and want to use their own languages and study in their own languages? The people who I was speaking with at this tent setup behind me, they're saying that, well, in these other countries, if you go to school, you study in the native language of that country. And another point that they're raising, which is a primary point in this language issue is the issue of Russification, the, in a sense, forced adoption of Russian language and Russian culture, which occurred throughout the Soviet Union, but most certainly occurred here, where still Russian dominates the language and cultural sphere. So in the minds of many Ukrainian politicians and pro-Ukrainian activists, people here aren't speaking Russian because it's their cultural identity and it's because it's the language they really choose, but in their minds it's because the language was forced upon them in the past by Russians and the Russian state and Soviet Union and even the Russian Empire. So these are these issues that Ukraine is confronting with regard to ethnicity and language. They are very present, and as evidence here, they can lead to violence. But for now, Kharkiv is a peaceful city. I wouldn't say there's a whole lot going on here, but it's a great opportunity to visit what is very much a borderland within a borderland. It's a way to get a glimpse at the presence of Russian culture and language in Ukraine, yet in a place in a country that remains very much Ukrainian. So, goodbye from Freedom Square in Kharkiv. I've got to head out of here, and my Ukrainian trip is drawing to a close pretty soon, but I will still be getting back to you from elsewhere in the country. Goodbye.